During this week in the Liminal village, we have had many activities to raise our consciousness, to express our connectedness, and we have raised our spirit to evolve. Our next speaker is Pete Bampton. He is a spiritual teacher of conscious evolution. He is the co-founder of the Awakened Life project, a project in the Serra do Açor in Portugal. And he is going to talk about how to create a new culture here and now together.
Hello? Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Annalika, for the introduction. We're going to go on a journey together this afternoon into the evolution of consciousness. So I'm going to share with you some of what I've learned and discovered together with many other people over the last 25 years of intensive spiritual work into this question of enlightenment, but also enlightenment in the 21st century, right here and now, and how we actually take it all forward. So I'm very happy to be here in the Liminal village. I want to thank Rita and the whole team here who are working very hard behind the scenes. Maybe everyone would like to give them a big hand. And I also love the name Liminal Village, because liminal means edgy or on the edge, pushing into the limits of what's possible. So we're actually leaning forward, not knowing but wanting to know what's possible. So I ask all of you to have that spirit as I speak to you this afternoon, to have an open mind and be willing to be positively challenged and open and see where we go. So to start, I would like to do something that might seem a bit bizarre at the Boom Festival, which is to do a short 5-minute meditation together, just to touch base with the mystery of consciousness itself. Everybody up for that? So, and I'd also request, I know everybody's got their stuff lying on the floor, but if the people who are really interested in what I've got to share would like to move a bit more to the center, that would be helpful. But it's totally up to you. And also, for those of you who are really interested in what I have to share, I'd also ask you to sit up, because it does help to pay attention. And it also helps if we want to meditate. Okay, so I'm just going to give a little bit of guidance. So I want to ask you just to sit up straight if you can. I know that's difficult if you're sitting on the floor, you don't have any cushions, but sit as straight as you can. And close your eyes. And relax. Simply relax as deeply as you can. Take a few deep breaths. and at the same time simply pay attention. And turn your attention inward. Onto the mystery of consciousness itself. So there's all kinds of content and objects that we may be aware of in our consciousness. There's the sounds from outside, the sensations, our physical sensations, the movement of mind, memory, feeling, emotion. So I want you to let all of that be exactly as it is. Don't try to control your experience. Don't try to change your experience. Just let it all go. Just let it be. And allow yourself to be more fascinated, more compelled by the space, the context of consciousness itself, in which all objects, internal and external, arise. And if you find yourself getting lost in thinking what you're going to have for dinner later, or what you're going to do tomorrow, or what you're going to do when you finish the Boom Festival, just bring your attention back. Just let it go. Don't make a judgment, don't make a problem. Just bring your attention back to rest on consciousness itself. So I'm going to stop speaking for a few minutes and just join you in that no place. When we let go of our infatuation with and attachment to all of the objects that arise in consciousness, we begin to experience freedom. A vast open expanse in which we have nothing, we know nothing, and we are no one. In that place, there's perfect peace. There's freedom from the endless roller coaster of fear and desire. As we return to the source of our being. Before the Big Bang, before creation, before anything ever happened, I am. Now, traditionally, the great mystics, teachers, masters through history have told us that this is the place that is ultimately real. An absolute, undifferentiated consciousness where we are all already one. And that's as true now as it's ever been. But in our time, there is something new under the sun that is beginning to emerge. Mysticism, enlightenment itself, is evolving. And so from this place, from the ground of being, in which there is no impetus to do anything, to change anything, we're all already one in unmanifest stillness. From there, we're going to take a journey into the outer reaches of our cosmic evolution in creation, in time, right here and now. So Paolo, could we have the first video, please?
Let yourself follow this theological fantasy, just for a moment. Imagine what it would be like to be God, resting in a perfectly blissful, overwhelmingly peaceful state of being for infinite eons of no time. In that profound stillness, nothing is missing, and there is no desire whatsoever. Absolutely nothing has occurred. That's where you were before the beginning, before the Big Bang. Perfect peace and boundless bliss. Quietude without end. Unburdened by the weight of existence, you could not have been more content. Yet, for some reason, out of that perfect contentment, you made a decision to create the cosmos. You chose to manifest a material universe from your own unmanifest emptiness. You could have continued to rest happily in being, meditating on nothingness for more countless eons of infinite no time. But you had already done that. Forever. So you chose to take the unthinkable step and endeavor to manifest your own self in and through form. Where did that choice come from? Where, in that empty perfection, would the impetus arise to do something so vast, so complex, so overwhelming? What could be a greater challenge than to create something out of nothing, to manifest a material universe before form had ever existed? But you apparently decided to take that unimaginable step. How do I know? Because it's happening. Because we are here, now, 14 billion years later, reflecting on this very question. And considering the fact that at the deepest level of consciousness itself, there is only one, and that one is who you always are, you would have to conclude that at every step of the way, from before the beginning in infinite no time, through the choice to take the plunge from formlessness into form, and up until the present moment, it could only be you, and you alone, who is responsible for all of this. Who else could it possibly be?
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to be sharing with you a new path, a new spiritual teaching, as the caption just said. And if you're intrigued by what I'm going to share, then I recommend you get that book, Evolutionary Enlightenment. It's recently come out. I'm obviously biased, but in my opinion, it's the most significant spiritual book of our times. But find out for yourself. So what I want to share with you is my experience and what I've discovered, and what is also the foundation of our project here in Portugal called the Awaken Life Project. It is a spiritual revelation and perspective and understanding that really does meet the challenge of our times. And I think we're all agreed that we are living in tipping point times. I know many of the speakers who've been here have already been speaking about this. We all know we're living in times of crisis on many levels, converging from all directions. But I think we'd all agree, at least I'd hope we'd all agree in this tent, that the real crisis is a crisis of consciousness. So does everybody agree on that? Put your hand up if you agree it's a crisis of consciousness. So the problem isn't just out there with the quote system, the matrix, the governments, the bankers, whatever. The problem's in here. The quote problem. And we're all a part of it. Another thing I'd just like to look into just before we start is one of the motifs for boom is this phrase that we hear a lot, and I think we all on a heart level, an intuitive level, resonate with it, which is we are one. Okay, so put your hand up if intuitively, experientially, or philosophically, you have no doubt that we are one. Okay, and if you have some doubt, that's fine, you know. Okay, so that's nearly everyone. So, the revelation of oneness, or non-duality, which means not two, has traditionally been called enlightenment. Okay, so I just want to be clear that when we talk about enlightenment, when I'm speaking about enlightenment, we're talking about this mystical truth, this ultimate truth of oneness or non-duality. So what does that mean? It means the ultimate truth is, although there's many of us sitting here in this tent right now, from many different countries, different personal histories, different backgrounds, strengths, weaknesses, underneath all that, there's one consciousness, one being that is animating all of us and is fundamentally animating everything, the whole cosmos. That spark that enlivens these body-mind vehicles is ultimately one. So what does it really mean, though? What does it really mean, we are one? Okay, what does that mean? It's a very attractive notion. It resonates with us deeply, I'm sure. But have we ever considered the fact that if it's true that there is only one, ultimately, that also means that there's only you. That only you exist. Because there's only one. Yeah? And if there's only you, if you are that one, that as was spoken about in the video, if you are that one, if I am that one, that mysteriously, for some mysterious reason, decided to create a universe, and as far as we know, I think it's 13.7 billion years later, they think, at the moment. Here we are 13.7 billion years later, here we are in these bodies, in these minds at the Boom Festival, right? But what if we would consider that the spiritual truth that we're only one means that you and I, as that one, are ultimately responsible for this whole event? We decided to create it, we decided to be here. And I think everybody here is very concerned, I'm sure, and very interested in what is the next step for humanity, for human beings. Is everybody interested in that? What is the evolution of consciousness as ourselves, as humanity? So that's only going to happen. It's only going to happen for real if some of us actually start taking that truth all the way down to the bottom and recognizing, well, it's up to me. The evolution of consciousness, the evolution of the human race, how far we can go, how far we want to go, and it's very clear that we have to and need to at this time, it's ultimately dependent on each and every one of us feeling responsible and taking responsibility for it. Now, this word responsibility often sounds a bit heavy. We often tend to have a kind of heavy connotation like, oh my God, he's telling me to be responsible. But I like to look at the root meaning of the word, which is ability to respond, which is really what responsibility means. It's ability to respond. So that means if we are that one, if we are consciousness, we embrace the fact that we, whoever we are able to respond to this call, and I'm calling it for this talk, the call from the cosmos, this call that's calling us to evolve. Okay? So, evolutionary enlightenment, which is what I'm going to share with you, or evolutionary spirituality, is a very recent, a very new emergence in the history of mysticism, history of spirituality. And I'm just going to give you a very brief history of enlightenment to just put it in a context a little bit. So, most traditional teachings of enlightenment from the Buddha, I mean, the Buddha and Buddhism is obviously the classic example, Hindu Vedanta, Chinese Taoism. Generally, and I'm going to be making generalizations here, okay, because I'm really wanting to bring out some unifying patterns, so just bear with me. I know there's exceptions to everything I'm going to say. But generally, traditionally, the path of enlightenment to spiritual enlightenment has been a path of removal from, of retreat from this world. It's been a path of transcendence. So in the time of the Buddha, for example, life wasn't changing very much for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And people were living in drudgery, and, we think life's tough these days, but life was pretty tough back then. And people just felt that life was cyclical, that it was just going round and round. And you've probably heard of this in the cosmology of Buddhism, the wheel of birth and death. It's just going round and round. So you're born, you have to go through all that hassle and pain of growing up, and then, you might have a few pleasurable experiences here and there, but as the Buddha said, everything changes, everything's impermanent. So whatever higher states, higher peak experiences you have, they're going to fade away. And, and then one day you're going to die anyway. And if you don't realize who you are beyond the mind, beyond time, you're going to be reborn into this endless cycle. That's just like a merry-go-round. It's just going round and round and round. Okay? So in the more traditional spiritual worldview, this whole created universe didn't seem to be going anywhere. It didn't really seem to be any purpose to it. In fact, many spiritual teachings go as far as to say that the whole world is an illusion, that it's not, there's nothing actually real about it at all. And the only way we actually discover what reality is, what truth is by taking that journey, just like we did for just 5 minutes. Usually we'll need a little bit longer than that, but when we take that journey, when we let go of mind, thought, feeling, history, time, and we start to discover that source, that deep consciousness that is always free, that never changes, that never enters and never did enter the world of time. Okay? So, as a result of that, most traditional spiritual paths, like I said, it's been about a disengagement, a withdrawal from the world. So that's why the Buddha, for example, he set up his monasteries in the forests, so people went to the mountains to meditate. There's many other examples. Now, every time I give talks, this is the question I often ask. I lay out this whole picture, which I've just done to you now. And I say, so here we are, we're all people that are feeling and experiencing a spiritual impulse to evolve, to transcend, however we want to describe it. How many of us feel that it makes sense to leave the world, to withdraw, to disengage from the world, to just go up into the hills and disappear, and just become one with the unborn manifest within? Does anybody think that really makes sense in the 21st century? And if you do, that's fine, go ahead. Many people do. Many people do. Many people do. But many of us actually, on a very deep level, we actually feel, well, actually, no, that's not enough. There's something else emerging in consciousness now that is calling us to participate, to engage. So let me just fill that out a bit more. So, again, I'm making generalizations. I just want everyone to bear that in mind. So, what came after those fundamental spiritual teachings that I just mentioned? For example, in Buddhism, you had the Mahayana revolution. And many people, anybody heard of the Mahayana? So the Mahayana was the greater vehicle of Buddhism. And you see that in Tibetan Buddhism. And what they realized, this was about 500 years after the Buddha, they said, well, no, the absolute truth is not only nirvana. And nirvana being timeless, spaceless, peace, bliss beyond creation. But it's also samsara, it's also the world. And it's also all those beings in the world. And in the Mahayana, they said there is no difference between form and emptiness, between creation and the uncreated. It's all part of one whole. And so then in the Mahayana, you had the development of the Bodhisattva vow, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. So the Bodhisattva vow was all about the spiritual aspirant who vowed to postpone his own enlightenment, his own liberation, until all other sentient beings were liberated. Okay? So you had this great pouring out and wellspring of compassion, of love, of care for all sentient beings. And of course, that's a tremendous thing, that's a beautiful thing, and that was a profound evolution of enlightenment at that time. And we see that in the beauty of the Tibetans and of the whole of Tibetan Buddhism, for example. But in that cosmology, the purpose is still to get everybody out of here. Because there's still this fundamental conviction, understanding that the whole created universe is just a cyclical process. It's not ultimately going anywhere. It's just going round and round. And so the Bodhisattva was one who vowed to devote his life to waking up as many human beings as possible, so as many human beings as possible could get out of here, could transcend this world of form and creation that isn't ultimately going anywhere. Okay? So what I'm pointing to is that and again, making generalizations, so what I'm pointing to is that in traditional spirituality, you can also see it in Christianity, right? There's often an extreme or subtle life negative view. So in Christianity, of course, the real action is not here. It's in heaven. So we've got to be good boys and good girls and do the right thing. And if we're lucky, we might go there. But the real action is definitely not here. This is a vale of tears. The Buddha said life is suffering. There's nothing really of great merit or purpose to be found here in the created universe. But what I want to share with you is what I would call the third turning of the Dharma wheel. So in Buddhism, they talk about the turning of the wheel. The first one being the enlightenment of the Buddha. The second one being the Mahayana revolution that said there is no separation between the unmanifest and the manifest. And there was that whole explosion of compassion. But now in our time, amongst a number of leading spiritual teachers and philosophers and thinkers, there's a third turning of the wheel of the Dharma of enlightenment that is emerging, that I believe is absolutely culturally relevant for our time. Because, let's face it, I think it's very obvious to all of us that care about what is going on in the world these days, that transcending the world and just being free from the world is not actually going to take us to the next stage in our unfolding. What I'm really contending is that just being here now isn't enough. Being here now is absolutely essential, right? We have to be grounded in that. We have to discover that. We all need to discover a freedom and a consciousness and a context that is deeper than the endless chatter of our mind and the endless ups and downs of our emotions. But being here now, or the truth of unmanifest, profound enlightenment in just in pure being, is not the end. It's not the end of the path. Traditionally, it was the end of the path. But these days, it's the beginning. It's the beginning of a whole new possibility for human consciousness. So what is the third turning of the wheel? Well, it's all to do with this miraculous and magical phenomenon that's been discovered in all fields of life these days, and that's something called evolution. Evolution. So I'm not just talking about what Darwin discovered and the biological evolution, but in all fields these days, whether it's cosmology, physics, biology, anthropology, probably many more fields that are just not coming to my mind right now. What we're discovering is that we are all in movement. We are all part of a process that is going somewhere. And one thing I like about the boom, actually, is this spirit, this sense of evolution, that we're going somewhere, this spirit of make change happen, is very alive. I feel it here. This isn't just a be here now kind of hippie gathering, okay? And again, I'm just making a generalization. There's some really cool hippies, don't get me wrong. I used to have hair down to here myself. But it's not just about being here now. We're actually responding to something. I think more and more of us are feeling this kind of impulse that change must happen, can happen, and we are the ones to make it so. Okay? So how many people resonate with that? Okay, great. So that impulse, that compulsion that many of you just said you recognize and experience, that is not personal to you. I hope that was clear, because there's so many people here who said they experienced it. I'm sure there's many more. That impulse, that part of us that cares, right, that actually feels the pain, and might sometimes bring us to despair. I mean, but feels the pain and the urgency of our evolutionary moment in history, right? That part of us that feels that, recognizes that, and feels compelled in some way, shape, or form to respond, right? That's what I'm going to call, and what my teacher Andrew Cohen called, the evolutionary impulse. So maybe just start to reframe that impulse that we all experience and recognizing, especially at these times. We could connect that, as was beautifully described in the video, with the Big Bang itself, with the creative impulse itself. Because if it's true that something that's ultimately arrived at you and me, if it's true that something came from nothing, right? And as far as we know, that's what happened. And if it's true that we're all one, we were all there. We were all there before the beginning, and we all chose, for some inexplicable reason, to say yes and give birth to this whole creation. So how many can take it that far? How many feel some resonance with that? Okay, good. Good. So I just want to talk a little bit about evolution, what we've learned about evolution. The nature of evolution is to expand and to complexify and to deepen. So if we just look at it from the point of view of, in the beginning, there was hydrogen gas, right? As one of my favorite cosmologists, Brian Swim, says, if you leave hydrogen gas alone for long enough, you get the music of Mozart, Shakespeare, and everything that human culture has created. Is that not a miracle of all miracles? If you leave hydrogen gas alone long enough, and here we are. How has that happened? Now, many scientific rationalists, materialists, are still very intent on insisting, well, it's all just a big cosmic accident. You know, atoms started to collide, and through some, inexplicable coincidence, molecules were formed, and etc., and they got together and formed cells, and, it's just all a big cosmic accident. But the further that science penetrates into the mystery of life, particularly cosmology, but also physics, and I'm sure you're all aware of quantum physics, which is ultimately discovering, well, there is only energy, actually. But there's also been some fascinating discoveries in cosmology in recent years, the last 10, 20 years. One of them is that if the rate of expansion of the universe was 1/1,000,000th of 1% slower, the galaxies would never have been able to form. Everything would have just compressed in on itself and would just be a big black hole. If the expansion was 1/1,000,000th of 1% faster, the same thing, the galaxies could not have formed, it would all just be dust. And there's many, many other revelations and insights that I could share with you, but I don't have time, and this isn't really, I don't want to just go into all the cosmological discoveries. But just that one, I'll give you an example, that what we're finding and what we're recognizing is there's a tremendous intelligence at work in the universe that seems to be guiding this whole process. And if it's true that we, as the One, are the ones who actually chose to ignite this whole process, then that intelligence is none other than ourselves at some very profound level. So that intelligence created atoms, but the atoms weren't happy to just swim around together, just being atoms. They said, hey, let's get together. Why don't we get together and let's form a molecule? Okay, and then suddenly we have molecules. But the molecules, they weren't happy just to float around in the cosmic soup being molecules. They said, hey, everybody, let's get together. Let's more molecules get together. Let's form a cell. And on it goes. And then, of course, cells from bacteria right up to you and me have been getting together, have been complexifying, unifying, to create more and more sophisticated forms and expressions of this miracle called life. So, I'm just going to take a drink of water, excuse me. So, if we actually start to internalize the truth, and I think there is no doubt to any intelligent, sensitive human being that it is true. There's still plenty of people who deny it, especially in America. They still think that Adam and Eve was where it all began, and God just buried all those fossils in the ground just to trick us, just to test our faith. But I think most of us here, if not all, would agree that evolution is a truth. Everyone would agree that it's a truth? There appears to be some kind of movement, some kind of direction in the cosmic process here. So, of course, that begs the question, in terms of all of us here as human beings, that begs the question, well, what's next? Are we the endpoint of 13.7 billion years, as far as we know, cosmic evolution? Are we the endpoint? How many people think we're at the endpoint? Okay, that's good. There's hope. Are we the endpoint? As the current state, the current psyche, the current operating system of humanity, is it the endpoint, right? Or is it just a stage along the way? Or another way to put it is, are we transitional beings? So your experience, my experience of being a human being, is that a final endpoint? Is that something that's static? Or are we actually part of a process that's going somewhere, that's moving, that is not solid? Right? How many people resonate with that? That we're going somewhere. And humanity is not finished yet. Okay, well, actually, it's my conviction and belief that we're just getting started. I think we're just getting started. Why do I say that? Because the way I see it is that it's taken that long, 13.7 billion years, for God, let's call it God, which is none other than who we really are in the deepest place, for God, through this process of creation and emergence, to create human beings, organisms, body-mind organisms, that are actually capable of beginning to reflect on the process itself. Now, of course, there may be other beings in other parts of the galaxy and the universe that have been doing this a lot longer than we have. Well, I guess we'll find out one day. But in this corner of the universe, this corner of our galaxy, as far as we know, this is as far as the process has come. It's you and me. It's our ability to actually reflect not only on our own experience, which is what makes us distinct from the animals. Okay? Now, the animals and the plants and all the other created beings, all expressions of the one being. But as far as we can see, and you know, I'm not saying this is just a blanket truth. There may be animals that are self-conscious in similar ways that we are. I don't really know. But generally speaking, I think it's pretty clear that what makes us human is our ability to reflect. It's self-consciousness, the fact that we're self-aware. Homo sapiens sapiens means the one who knows that he knows. Okay? So not only have we developed to that point, which is pretty much where most of us are, I hope, but we're now, for those of us who are starting to wake up, who are starting to internalize this whole evolutionary story of our origins, and we're starting to reframe and recontextualize who we are and where we've come from, we're starting to actually reflect on and wake up to the fact that we're part of a cosmic process that is in movement, that is going somewhere and wants to go somewhere from where we are right now. So a couple of the other speakers earlier, Chris Eisenstein and I think Daniel Pinchbeck, they were also talking about the importance of revisioning our human story. You know, how do we find a story, a context, an understanding for life that actually can unite us, that can actually bring us together in these times when there's so much separation and so much alienation? If we start to internalize, start to embrace this fact that we're all part of a process that's going somewhere, that's not only tremendously unifying, but it's tremendously thrilling. And the more you lean into it, the more you consider it, what you're going to experience is the arising of this evolutionary impulse. And what is the expression of that impulse? It's curiosity. It's passion. It's passion for change. It's passion for as yet unmanifest potentials. It's passion for the new. Okay, it's what, and the experience of that passion is absolutely life-affirming and thrilling. It's the thrill of existence itself. So, you're probably thinking, well, how did this guy get here, or why does he sound so confident about what he's saying? So maybe just to step back a bit, I'll just share a little bit about my own story, and also my own spiritual teacher, Andrew Cohen, because the discovery and the ongoing emergence and recognition that I'm describing, in my case, has been through being part of a living laboratory, a living experiment over a 20-year period with human beings who were completely dedicated to this question of what's next and what does it mean to live a liberated human life in an evolutionary context beyond separation, beyond fear. So just to tell you a bit about my journey, when I was very young, probably like many of you, I didn't feel like I belonged in this world, and I couldn't really find any resonance with life as it was, what the expectations were with settling down, getting a job, getting married, having kids, all that. It's just like, no, I'm not going to do that, no. I will not live a mediocre life. I want to find out, who am I and why am I here? Those were the two big questions that completely captivated me from a very young age. And that said, they sent me traveling around the world. They also sent me on, while I was traveling around the world, for a while I did experiment with psychedelics. And they definitely opened some windows and doors and made me aware, well, there's much more going on here than I've been told, as I'm sure a lot of you can resonate with. But for me, anyway, my passion was I wanted to find a way to penetrate into these depths that I'd glimpsed in some peak experiences through my own efforts and not relying on any substances. So I was in Thailand at the time, and I'd been doing some psychedelics and having some visionary experiences. I was very inspired. But then I heard about a Buddhist meditation retreat that was 10 days in silence in the forest. And it was very austere. We're all sleeping on a slab of wood with a mosquito net hung over it. We only had about 4 hours sleep a night. I think it was 1 meal a day. And it was in silence. And it was just meditation. And I won't go into the details of what we were actually doing on the retreat, but I'd never experienced anything like this before. But I just gave myself to it wholeheartedly. And towards the end of this retreat, I had a profound awakening, a revelation of non-duality. And I will never forget walking into the jungle after the meditation session, and I was the trees. I remember just standing in front of a tree. I was like, it's me. So this whole duality of the observer in here and the observed completely collapsed in on itself. And there was just one. There was just one. There was no distinction between inner and outer. And anybody had experiences similar to that? I'm sure a lot of you had. Right. So that experience kind of burned a hole in my soul. Not a negative hole. Maybe a better way to say it is it made a very deep impression that I could never forget. And I carried on traveling and doing this and that, but pretty soon it became clear that the only thing that was going to give depth and meaning to my life was to devote myself wholeheartedly to that, whatever that was, the rediscovery of that. Now, I'd experienced that mystery in the context of Buddhism, and I was very attracted to Buddhism and the ascetic kind of life. I always loved a life of simplicity, and I resonated very much by the whole idea of withdrawing from the world, you know, all the complexity and chaos of life. I had a big part of me just wanted to escape. So I got involved with that path for quite some years very seriously, and ended up doing many, many meditation retreats and had a lot of similar experiences. And for quite a while, it seemed like I might even become a monk. Thank God that never happened. But I was that passionate about it that if that's what was going to happen, then I was ready for that to happen. But so I was very much attracted to what I spoke about earlier, the more traditional perspective of enlightenment, of kind of retreating from the world, transcendence, freedom from the world. It's all a dream. You know, there's nothing really going on here, no purpose. I want to get out of here. That was kind of the track I was on. And then I started to live in a Buddhist monastery. It was actually in England. And although there was a lot of pure intention there and, you know, clarity and understanding and goodwill, I just began to feel like there was nobody I could see there who was really free. Whatever liberation was, whatever enlightenment was, I just had a intuitive sense, well, I wasn't finding it there, at least for me. And I also began to question, well, you know, does it make sense to become a monk and follow a 2,500-year-old tradition with all kinds of rituals, you know, from that time in the 21st century? And I just began to have serious doubts about that. And actually, I ended up in a spiritual crisis. And because I knew I wasn't going to do that, I wasn't going to become a monk, but also I had nothing to go back to. So then what happened is, and I'll just speed up the story a bit, is what happened is I went to listen to a young American spiritual teacher teach in London. I think he was about 30 at the time. No, he was a little older. He was about 35. I was 27. And I discovered a book written by Andrew Cohen about his own story, about his own awakening. And when I had read this book, actually at the Buddhist monastery, I had a profound awakening myself that was completely different from any other spiritual experience that I'd had. And I can only describe it as what I titled this talk, a call from the cosmos. I mean, everything fell away. I felt a complete shattering of my individuality, of everything I thought I was. I remember walking out into a meadow, into the park, but this wasn't just an experience of peace and cessation and relief, cosmic relief. There was this immense call, and I remember just looking up into the sky, and it was all I began to see this cosmic intelligence all around me, and I felt it was actually pointing at me, and it's almost as if the universe was pointing at me and saying, "I need you. You know, I depend on you." You know, there was this tremendous sense of obligation and a calling, and this was both ecstatic, completely ecstatic, and absolutely terrifying at the same time. So that's how I got involved with Andrew Cohen. I went to meet him, and the thing that struck me right away was that there was something just spontaneously happening. I mean, Andrew never set out for this to happen, but people would come to him. They would have all kinds of extraordinary experiences like the one I described. But for some reason, people just didn't just have these experiences and then go back to their lives. They wanted to stay together. People were drawn together and wanted to share this experience together. And very early on in his work as a teacher, Andrew began to recognize that there was something happening between people that was more significant than any individual's spiritual experience. And whatever this mysterious thing was that was happening between people, it had something to do with evolution. He began to talk about an evolutionary impulse. that was arising in people. So basically, I found my home amongst these people. It was like being on a magical mystery tour into the mysteries of the cosmos. We were all just ecstatic and completely awake with curiosity and wonder. And we just said a big yes to the journey. We had no idea what we were saying yes to, but we just knew we had to say yes to it. So, one of the things that Andrew discovered, that we all discovered over time, was that spiritual experiences, as profound as they may be, do not usually liberate an individual. It's very rare that a spiritual experience, even a very profound one, is enough to actually transform ourselves and our whole relationship to life. And you know, this happened in the early days. People would come, they have these blowout experiences, you know, have wonderful revelations. But then over time, everybody would fall back pretty much to their center of gravity. And of course, then there'd be a yearning for the higher state or the deeper state experience again. And maybe some of you can relate to this. And one phrase that Andrew used to use very much at the time, he still uses it occasionally, is that everybody wants to get enlightened, but nobody wants to change. Anybody think there's some truth in that? Okay, good. Because changing is a lot more of a challenge than just having one blowout revelation and experience after the other. I mean, of course, they're going to have some impact on our perception and understanding, but do we actually change as a result? How much do we actually change as a result of our deepest experiences? You may have noticed that two people can have exactly the same revelation, deep spiritual experience, maybe recognize that the deepest truth is that I never existed as a separate entity. And one person might just relate, you bring it up later on and they say, oh yeah, that was really amazing, that was a really cool experience. But they haven't really changed one bit. But then someone else might have an experience like that and their whole life changes. Their whole reason for being and the whole direction of their life changes. So this is something that we began to discover and work with, and what really came out of it was a whole understanding of what it takes to consciously evolve. What I mean by that is spiritual experiences, spiritual revelation is often a result of grace. You could call it grace. You know, these things happen, especially if you take a psychedelic substance. Obviously, something might happen. But many spiritual experiences they're just a result of grace. And but if we don't develop a profound intention and understanding of the human condition, of the forces within us that don't want anything to do with enlightenment or evolution, right? If we don't actually learn about those forces and understand them, so that we can transcend them in ourselves, our spiritual revelations and the promise of our deepest understanding that we are all one, that a new world is possible, that maybe we're just at the beginning of our potential as human beings. That promise, that potential is not really going to emerge unless we all take it really seriously. And really embrace the fact that it's up to us, it's up to me to bring that into being. So I'm going to show you a video now. It's about 10 minutes, where Andrew Cohen and a number of students, so spiritual brothers and sisters of mine, speak about this whole evolutionary emergence that we started to experience and discover. But before I show you, there's a couple of terms that I just want to define so you'll know what's being talked about. And one of them is what Andrew Cohen calls the authentic self. So the authentic self is who you are, right? What you become when your body-mind vehicle, your personality, is expressing the evolutionary impulse. So when your ego, right, so I'll also define that word because people have different definitions for the word ego. So when I'm going to use it here, I'm not talking about the psychological definition, which is the individual, right? When I use the word ego, I'm talking about all the forces, individual and collective, that insist on separation, that insist on denial of the truth, that are based on fear, and all the rest of it. So the ego, a nice acronym for ego, which I like, is edging God out. E-G-O, edging God out, right? So it's that part of us that wants to push God out the picture, right? And it's a part of all of us, right? It's a part of all of us. So that's what the ego is. The authentic self is what we express and what we are when we're vehicles for this evolutionary consciousness, for this emergence. And another word I just want to define is intersubjective, because what we're talking about is an intersubjective emergence. What that means is evolutionary enlightenment or evolutionary spirituality is not just about an individual inner revelation and understanding. And again, and I'm generalizing, but again, traditionally, the path of enlightenment has been very much about an inner individual journey. You know, and then what can come out of that is all kinds of positive actions, of course. But the actual experience of non-duality, of enlightenment, has usually been an inner matter, right? So what I'm speaking about, the potential I'm speaking about, is something completely different, which is the emergence of the non-dual truth of unity and non-separation in time, in space, between us, between subjects. So that's what intersubjective means, right? It's actually happening in the field, in the collective field, between us. Okay, so Paolo, do you want to go for video number 2? Thanks.
The evolutionary potential for enlightenment, which is consciousness beyond ego, only emerges in an intersubjective context. That's when you see the value of it, the significance of it, the power of it. And if we want to create a new level or a new stage, that's a place we have to enter into together. A new stages of development are intersubjective structures that are created in consciousness. My own experience has convinced me that the enlightenment of the future is not going to be an individual event, as it has been in the past, but rather will be a collective, or what could be called an intersubjective emergence. This is really the core of what I'm trying to accomplish, the birth of a new level of consciousness in which the enlightened mind emerges through a collective.
Andrew Cohen has been developing his teachings of evolutionary enlightenment for the past 20 years. His vision of an intersubjective enlightened consciousness is the essence of his teaching work. This higher consciousness emerges when groups of individuals come together beyond ego. Cohen calls this emergence the authentic self. The authentic self is experienced as an ecstatic compulsion to evolve at the level of consciousness. After years of effort and commitment from Andrew and his students, a powerful surge of consciousness recently swept through Cohen's worldwide body of students, as we documented in a previous video. Cohen has worked tirelessly with his students to stabilize this higher consciousness. He believes that once the authentic self has been stabilized between people, it will become the foundation for a new stage of human development at the leading edge.
The authentic self is the pure urge to evolve at the highest level. It's the urge towards consciousness. It's the urge to become more conscious.
The following video captures the most recent emergence of the authentic self among Cohen's students, as they describe the wild, uncontrollable force of the creative impulse as it manifests between them.
So Richard, why don't you describe what happened yesterday?
It felt like the energy that we were generating collectively, individually, was a much higher consciousness. You felt literally your own consciousness was elevated, the collective consciousness was elevated. There was a live flow, a living current between the individuals and the collective.
Literally, it's like a force of creation, but not at the level of biology, but at the level of consciousness.
It's its own passion, it's its own surge that was coming through.
So what does the surge feel like?
It feels like a force that has its own intelligence, its own conscience, its own agenda. It's not personal to me.
It's complete, like deadly serious, urgent, straight, direct, and clear.
Limited freedom moving forward, almost like a surge of freedom moving forward, but at the same time, it was a ground of consciousness.
And at the same time, there was an expansion of a perspective on that experience, which was, there was a sense of also being very grounded in appreciation of it and what it takes for that to emerge.
When the authentic self emerges between people, what is discovered is that the intersubjective consciousness itself, which is the ground of a new culture, is evolving.
We're trying to, it's the classic idea of the evolution of consciousness, but we're actually trying to evolve consciousness, which is a profound thing. It's a difficult thing to get your hands around what that actually means, because consciousness is this ephemeral idea and it's hard to kind of grasp necessarily what it is, but that's literally what we're actually doing.
I really, for the first time, felt this incredible sense of total peace and understanding about why I was here.
And when you see people, I've seen many people awaken to what I'm calling the authentic self, what they awaken to is just pure, doubtless passion and conviction about being here, you see? And it's very, very powerful.
There's this tremendous stillness, and then there's this force that comes through that I almost physically feel like I can't contain it.
It felt to me like a kind of a new order of reality coming into our consciousness, you know, or something that's being created, but a much higher reality, and it's almost like I was thinking it's like an uber reality.
It's a wild thing, and yet it has a direction. It's very, very clear about what it wants.
The spiritual impulse or evolutionary impulse, as the urge to become conscious, comes from within. It comes from the self.
There is such an enormous surge of consciousness that just wants to speak out of you.
There is a compulsion. There's an I must, I have to, I must. It feels like an ultimate kind of obligation.
The main focus in the development of this higher consciousness is for each individual to become very aware of the choices being made to bring the authentic self into being. So it no longer is merely a spontaneous event, but is born from the conscious intention of each individual involved.
You literally feel like we're beginning to not only experience a surge of enlightened consciousness in a collective context, but we're actually beginning to appreciate it, to understand it, to actually participate in the evolution of that consciousness in real time through our own inquiry, through our own participation, through our own fundamental commitment to moving it forward. You can literally feel consciousness moving forward and actually evolving, and you actually can feel yourself begin to take hold of that process and understand that process, understand the dynamics of that process, and actually carry it forward with one's own heart and soul in a collective context with others.
So evolution at the level of consciousness happens through intersubjective friction. That's how the self evolves. The self does not evolve in isolation, right? It evolves through culture, through intersubjective engagement.
It only becomes real when each individual actively chooses to engage with it, and then it becomes like this living, it's almost like some living, breathing thing, and it's a like a presence almost.
You actually find oneself in a profoundly kind of engaged, awake, very conscious, very enlightened consciousness.
Sure, because we're speaking about the authentic self, right? That's what the authentic self is. Now, the authentic self in you and the authentic self in me is only interested in creating the future. Remember the urge towards consciousness, the urge to become more conscious, the ecstatic compulsion to evolve and to become more awake and more aware.
The goal of evolutionary enlightenment is to create actual structures in consciousness that can support a new stage of human development. Spontaneous eruptions of higher states of consciousness, however powerful they may be, only reveal what is possible. Unless the structures of a new stage are actually built individually and collectively, no matter how high we fly, inevitably we're going to fall back to the level of development we're accustomed to living from. But if each individual deliberately endeavours to cultivate a higher level of development within their own self, and then comes together with others who are also aspiring to the same noble goal, the evolution of consciousness in real time will actually begin to occur.
Because everything we're doing is all completely based upon people meeting in the authentic self and developing within that context.
Consciousness cannot and will not evolve merely of its own accord. It is only through the wholehearted commitment and intention from each individual to do so that consciousness is able to evolve. It's important to understand that these higher structures or levels do not pre-exist, but only emerge with our ability to actually create them. And this ultimately creative endeavor is something we cannot do alone.
When we talk about development of consciousness, usually you think about something happening to you that takes you to a higher level. And this is a very different sense, because there's a sense of putting our hands on that force together consciously and moving forward as it, with it, guiding it.
We're not just talking about raising my individual level of consciousness. We're actually speaking about a consciousness that's totally different.
That consciousness itself is what's evolving more than any particular individual.
You begin to realize that you are part of that creative edge. You begin to realize that together you are creating the edge of consciousness.
So you feel your hands are on a kind of live wire to the universe.
And it seems to need a collection of people to come together with the same level of intention and commitment to kind of like get the motor running. You know, the cogs click in together, and then the engine takes on a completely different type of power, and he's going on a completely different track.
So the urge towards consciousness is what I'm calling the authentic self, is a different part of yourself than is the ego. And that part of yourself and that part of myself is not self-conscious in the negative sense, is not afraid of life, is not ambivalent about being here on earth. There's not a trace of ambivalence. There's no hesitation. There is no doubt. There's also no existential confusion. For example, if you meet somebody and you meet them at a moment when they feel particularly awake to what I'm calling the authentic self, you'll notice a kind of intoxicating joy and a kind of confidence, a kind of fearless passion and conviction about life, about being here, and how important it is to do things right and to create a better future. Why? Because that's why we're here. That's why we're here.
The whole creative process that got the whole universe going, from which the whole universe comes every moment, is actually who we are. And you can understand that on a theoretical level, but because it makes sense, it's just common sense, but when you engage experiential in the living fact of that, as a force within your own being, as a felt force, then what's possible for human beings in terms of creating a completely different world, it's unlimited.
There's huge potentials in this, huge potential for human beings, for what we can do as human beings right now in this world. There's hope. That's what I felt, there's hope.
In this profoundly awakened context, where higher consciousness has emerged as the intersubjective ground, a truly revolutionary potential reveals itself. And I really believe that it is here that we can find our individual and collective salvation. It's a window into a completely new order of human relationship, in which we not only awaken to this higher level of consciousness together, but even more importantly, begin to engage with it in order to find out how to create the future.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. I thought I'd also like to read to you something I wrote after after I experienced this emergence that everyone was talking about here for the first time. And this happened about 11 years ago. And here's what happened, in my own words, in my own experience. On the night of July 30th, 2001, and I also want to preface this by saying this happened after an immense amount of hard work and commitment and facing into all our darkness and all the parts of us that didn't want anything to do with it. It was quite an excruciating process of purification. So I just want to add that, because this is not just a story of, sweetness and light. This is real. And so what I'm going to describe now emerged after all of us involved went through a tremendous ordeal, actually, of transformative pressure. We were in a cauldron, if you like, of evolutionary alchemy. We had a meeting together on July 30th, 2001 that was unprecedented in the history of the student body. From the very beginning, each individual spoke with a pure passion, transparency, and authenticity that expressed only their highest and deepest experience. The circle rapidly ignited into a ring of spiritual fire as we found ourselves consumed and transported beyond all knowing into the uncontainable mystery of a collective enlightened consciousness. All distinctions between the one and the many rapidly dissolved in a searing conflagration of unity. Every individual, mysteriously more fully themselves than ever before, melted into a glowing field of luminous energy. There was only one heart, one mind, and one voice that hungered to speak. But what was so new and utterly awe-inspiring was the unmistakable presence of a greater and higher intelligence that was emerging in this context of seamless autonomy and communion. This revelation was far more than just a spiritual experience. It was the palpable sensation of becoming a conscious part of an infinitely more conscious whole. It was as if we had somehow forged ourselves into being a great unified receiver that was now able to pick up a signal that was always there, but had hitherto remained beyond our reach. A new matrix of awakened consciousness, literally a new form of human being, unshackled from any vestige of separation, was surging into manifestation through us and as us. It vibrated with a luminous, insistent call that seemed to erupt from the depths of our souls and from the infinite vastness of the overarching cosmos simultaneously. It had its own agenda, and it was pregnant with a purpose that held the fruition and the resolution of the human predicament within it. This was implicitly and simultaneously known by all of us beyond the mind, and yet we were miraculously able to express it. One after another, we gave voice to our recognition that in this emergence lay the potential for not only the end of all conflict, but the creation of a new order of human relationship and a new world. A new epoch of limitless possibility was dawning and breaking over us in ecstatic waves of revelation. We spoke of the sensation of standing at the threshold of a new understanding of human existence, peering into our collective evolutionary future. The status quo of separation and conflict superseded by a miraculous context of unity and resounding creative purpose. We had miraculously penetrated together to the very fount of creation, and we were being called to be its servants. So, if you are compelled by this potential, what I'm sharing with you, of course, the big question is, well, how do we do it? How do we actually consciously evolve? So I'm going to take you through a very brief tour of how we do it, and it is going to be very brief because one could spend hours going into every aspect. But I'm going to give you a brief tour, And then we'll show another couple of videos, and then I want to leave plenty of time for questions if anybody has any. So could you bring up the models, please, Paolo? So can you read the text on here? Put up your hand if you can read it. Okay, a lot of you can't, so that doesn't matter, I'll explain it. So we're going to be looking at two models here. One represents unenlightenment, or personal and cultural collective ego, in the way I defined it before. And one represents evolutionary enlightenment, the authentic self, what our potential is, however you want to envisage that. Now, these two models do not represent duality. I want that to be clear. All they're representing is the different dimensions of ourselves, of our psyche, of the human condition. And if we are convinced, if we have no doubt that we are part of an evolutionary process, right, that we're in process, that we're a work in process, then it means we want to go somewhere new, right? It means there are higher stages and higher potentials that are available. And so we want to become very aware and conscious of what the current operating system is that is inhibiting that higher emergence. So that's why we want to really have the courage and interest to look at what ego is in a context of non-duality and enlightenment. So that's what we're going to look at first very briefly. So can you bring this one up? No, the other one. Okay. Oh. Okay, not so big. Let's pan out a bit. Okay, so I'm just going to take you on a quick guided tour through this model. So what you'll notice is the ground of being is at the bottom of both models. So what that's symbolizing is the unmanifest, non-dual truth of non-separation. That whether we're lost in ego consciousness or whether we're expressing the beauty and humanity of a Buddha or a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King or whoever we admire, all of us in the deepest place are already free. We're already enlightened. Those of us who are just more lost in ego consciousness just don't know it or don't want to know it. So in the deepest place, we are all already free, and we are already one, and we are already consciousness, whether we're lost in ego or not. So that's what this symbolizes. So what are some of the expressions of ego consciousness as I'm describing it? Well, one is resistance to change, okay? Anybody recognize that? Anybody relate to that force in themselves? Resistance to change, right? There's a part of us that don't want to change. We just want things to be how they are, because it's all very safe and secure. I know who I am. I know who you are. I know how things are. Don't shake it up too much. Thank you. Right? That's really the voice of the ego. Resistance to change or inertia. Inertia. Heavy, sleepy. Or in Portugal they say, amanhã, amanhã. Don't want to deal with it now. Right? It's that inertia. It's passivity. It's like, oh, yeah, this is really cool. We've got to evolve. Evolution consciousness, cool, man, fantastic, but not right now. I just don't feel like it right now, okay? So there's that force of inertia in us that doesn't really want to change. Insistence on limitation, right? The ego mind in us is always insisting on limitation, what's not possible, right? Anyone relate to that? All your ideas about yourself, all your convictions about yourself that make you believe that radical transformation and evolution is not possible. I mean, come on, let's be realistic. You have to be aware that ego always sounds very reasonable and realistic. It can give you a whole load of very good reasons why it's not possible. Very rational, very reasonable. But that is its purpose, is always to keep us within the cage that we're already living in our own mind. Second one, victimization. So this is a big one. It's not my fault. It's the government's fault. It's the system. It's my mother. It's my father. It's my girlfriend, right? The problem is out there. I am not responsible. I am a victim. I am a victim of my past. I'm a victim of my history. I'm a victim of my cultural surroundings. Anybody relate to that voice? It's very familiar. Very familiar. I'm a victim. It's not possible. I'm doing everything I can. It's so hard for me. It's so hard for me. You don't understand. Right? So the ego always wants to make us feel that, that we're a victim, that we can't actually take responsibility for our own life, for our own consciousness, and actually make a real difference. Next one, face nothing and avoid everything. Okay, so that's pretty self-explanatory. The ego does not want to face anything that will threaten its domination, its dominion over the human body-mind. So most of us, we all have a very specific self-image. Maybe we think we're a very spiritual person. Maybe we think we're a saint. Or maybe we think that we're a bit of a loser and we're not, we're not really a very good person and we're a bit of a loser. Whatever it is, there's all kind of varieties on the theme. But the ego wants to protect the self-image at all costs. So when anything happens or any information begins to reveal itself that would suggest that it's not true, our self-image, our idea of who we are is not true, we avoid and deny and push it away and go, no, that can't be true. I'm not angry. Don't tell me I'm angry. I'm a spiritual person. Okay, that kind of thing. Compulsive personalization. So what that means is that every thought, every feeling, every emotion that we have means something about me. Right? Every thought, every feeling, every emotion is me. This is me. This is who I am. Okay? Compulsive personalization. So as we were doing in the meditation at the beginning, just for that 5 minutes, the only way we're going to contact the living, vibrant truth of who we are as consciousness is when we start to disengage and disidentify from the conviction that we are every thought and every feeling and every emotion and every memory that passes through our mind's eye. Right? So someone who is completely lost in ego consciousness believes that everything they think, everything they feel is who they are. And that all seems perfectly real to them. Anybody can relate to that? Okay, I'm sure you all can. And last one, pathological self-concern. So, as I think is pretty obvious, the ego consciousness only cares about itself. It's always looking out for me. What's good for me? What's good for my survival? What's good for my self-image? What am I going to get? It's basically all revolves around self-concern. And so if we're living in this consciousness, now of course there's varying degrees to which people live in this consciousness, but when we're embedded in this kind of consciousness, what's the result in terms of culture? And by culture I mean the world we create between people. It's maintaining the status quo, right? It's unconscious cultural structures. It's unquestioned belief systems. It's paranoia and mistrust. Right? So one way to look at what enlightenment means, what non-duality means in a very visceral human way, is it's the experience of trust. The experience of profound trust in life and in ourselves as an expression of life. And the ego cannot trust. It's based on fear and separation, competition, and paranoia. And then in the middle there, we have narcissism and collusion. So collusion is when we come together in a cultural context where the unspoken agreement is, I'm not going to challenge your ego if you don't challenge mine. Okay? So usually this is unspoken between people. It's like, okay, I'm not going to push you. I'm not going to challenge you, and you're not going to challenge me. And so we basically get to coexist in this world of separation and duality. But there's an unspoken agreement there that we're just going to let each other do that, right? And that's really the world at large. That's kind of accepted, right? So that's collusion in this context. Narcissism 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 is basically the perpetual fascination with ourselves as separate, unique human beings. And I just want to put this in a bit of a cultural context, because it's my conviction that narcissism is really a cultural epidemic in our society and in our time, in our Western civilization. And it's the negative side of what came out of the 60s. So in the 60s revolutions, of course, there were tremendous positive movements and cultural evolutions that came out of that, and tremendous freedoms, right? So we have the freedom of individual expression. We have gay rights, women's rights, right? Very important. Civil rights. And this whole festival here at Boone, I mean, all the freedom that we have here is all a product of that revolution. It's very recent, really. I mean, if we were living in the time of Salazar, the Portuguese dictator, I don't think this would be happening, right? So we are all beneficiaries of the great liberation movements of the 60s. And of course, as I said, tremendous positivity to that. But the negative side of what's come out of that is basically the age of the individual, the me generation, right? I'm sure you've all heard that. And so basically, we threw out the old traditional structures, the old religious structures, traditional social structures, because they were inhibiting. They were squashing us. But what's really become the highest value in place of all that is me and my desires, my freedom to do what I want to do whenever I want to do it. And that's really often how a lot of us grow up and are conditioned to think of freedom. It's the freedom to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And don't you dare tell me or push me in that arena, otherwise you're inhibiting my freedom. So there's a lot of positivity, of course, in that freedom. I mean, if you look at it in a historical perspective and culturally, we are the luckiest generation that's ever lived on the planet, I would say. I mean, look at all the freedoms we have. We can travel around the world. We've got all the information in the world at our fingertips. You know, you can just hear at Boom. I mean, this is a smorgasbord of, you know, things you can dip into and experience and explore. I mean, this has never happened in the history of humanity before, that all this information and experiential richness has been available to us. So we're tremendously lucky, right? But most of us don't usually feel that we're the luckiest people that have ever lived, because we're very embedded in this kind of narcissism of just like, it's all just about me and my freedom to do what I want when I want to do it. But if we start looking at it in a more evolutionary context, what are we actually doing with all the freedoms that we have? Is this freedom ultimately in service just of our own fears and desires, or can it and is it ultimately to be of service of our own evolution? So that's what narcissism represents. Oh, I lost the picture. And a couple more here. Cynicism. So cynicism is that voice, you know, that basically says it's not possible. Come on, get real, man. I mean, you know, it's all very nice and idealistic and all of that, but come on, get real. Cynicism is very cool in the country I'm from, in the UK. It's cool to be cynical in the UK. Anybody from the UK here? Isn't that true? It's cool to be cynical. It's cool to be ironic, because we've already been there and done that. You know, culturally, we had an empire, we ruled the world. I mean, that's not what we think, but the kind of cultural conditioning, the worldview is quite cynical, and it's cool to be cynical. And that's also why we've got this we've got one of the best sense of humors in the world, because we have this great play of irony that comes out of that, which can be very funny. But there's also often this very deep cynicism like, hey man, you know, let's get real. Nothing really outrageous is possible. And also it's not cool to be passionate and positive, okay? That's why we don't tend to like the Americans so much, because they're passionate and positive, right? And of course, they can be superficial and materialistic, but there's a certain passion and positivity in the culture. That's the positive side of America. Anyway, and then power hierarchy. So, of course, we all know about power hierarchies, dominator hierarchies, and we don't want anything to do with them, do we? Okay, we want to be free from power and dominator hierarchies. Okay, so can we put up the next one, please, Paula? So, evolutionary enlightenment. What is the expression of a human being who is aligned with this evolutionary impulse? So one thing I want to say right at the beginning is what this represents is both the path and the goal. So what I mean by that, it's a path that we can practice, that we can engage with, right? And it's also an expression of the goal, of the already liberated authentic self. So that's one thing I want to start with right from the beginning, is your authentic self. When I asked earlier how many of you experienced that evolutionary impulse that we can create a better world, I mean, nearly everybody put their hand up, right? So that impulse is all ready to go. It's already in us. It's already there. It's already complete, right? We just have to find a way to align with it. It's already there. So how do we do that? Well, number one, clarity of intention. You have to want to do that. So do you want your human vehicle, your personality, your body, mind, your life on this planet to be an expression of the highest possibility of whatever is the deepest truth that you've realized? Do you want that more than anything else? It's really the key. It's really the key to everything. I think I heard Charles saying something in the previous talk about intention. The power of our intention is the most powerful force in the universe. And when we align that with the creative impulse of the universe, with the Big Bang, that is wanting and waiting to surge forward in and as ourselves, then nothing can stop us. Anything's possible. It really takes the lid off. So clarity of intention is absolutely foundational, number one. Number two is the law of volitionality, or the power of choice. So when we have a very strong conscious of intention that I want to be a vehicle for the evolution of human consciousness, how is evolution expressing itself at the level of the human being? Is it expressing itself biologically? Are we going to grow another brain or an arm or something? I don't think so. I don't know, maybe in the future we will develop the biological vehicle a little more. I have no idea. But I think fundamentally we have a biological, physical organism here that's pretty perfected, with this incredible mind and brain. And now evolution is happening at the level of consciousness. How does it happen at the level of consciousness? Through conscious choice. We all have the ability to choose. Now, the definition of ignorance or unenlightenment is, no, I don't. I don't have any ability, because that's just me and I can't help it. And, that's how I am, right? Ignorance is when we don't know any better, when we can't see any deeper. But once we do begin to see deeper, once we do begin to recognize the structures of separation and duality in ourselves, then we can actually start to take responsibility for them and actually choose for the authentic self. So it really is all in our hands. How many people here believe that they can become masters of their destiny? Okay, great. That's really great. You can. It's all in your hands. And I can tell you, and many other people who are here can tell you, once you start to align with this intention and passion in yourself, miraculous things start to happen. The universe wants this to happen. That's what we're here for. Opportunities start to come our way. Unexpected encounters and happen. One thing leads to another. And suddenly you find yourself in this magical process of almost, the sense of being guided, of finding your way forward into a new world and a new potential. But it only happens when we accept complete responsibility for our own destiny. And we stop waiting. We stop waiting for someone else or God or something to do it for us. Okay? When you stop waiting, miracles occur. Next one, face everything and avoid nothing. Again, this is the natural state of enlightened awareness, enlightened consciousness. In enlightened awareness, there is no motive to see anything other than how it really is. You're only interested in seeing things as they are. Whether that's completely glorious and mind-blowing in its dazzling luminosity and potential, or whether it's incredibly painful in its darkness and primitive destructiveness. Okay? It's all in us. We contain all of the potential from an Adolf Hitler to the Buddha. That's the human condition. And it's in all of us. Most of us just like to stay in a nice narrow band in the middle where it's kind of comfortable. Well, sometimes I can be a jerk and, I can be in a bit of an egomaniac, but I don't really want to face into the really dark corners. And I'm really interested in spiritual potentials, but, transformation, radical transformation, me really making a big impact on culture and consciousness, that's a bit scary. That's a bit too much. So the challenge is to really open our hearts, open our minds to face the whole of the human condition as ourselves. The next one that's written here is the truth of impersonality. And another way of describing that is a process perspective, which is actually been updated from that now. A process perspective. So that follows on from what I was just saying, that we are the human condition. It is only the ego that creates the illusion that we are, that we are somehow completely unique. If I experience fear, if I experience joy, if you could get inside my body-mind, it would be pretty much the same experience that you have when you experience it. When any of us experiences sexual desire, right? Is it all completely unique and personal? Or is it pretty much the same experience that we all have? I mean, of course, there's varying degrees of intensity. But you see, the ego creates this illusion of, this special, unique experience that nobody else has and nobody else can understand. There's nobody like me, and nobody can really understand me. And so there's always this kind of barrier. But once you start to let in the revelation, the ultimate truth of oneness, you start to recognize, well, there's nothing really personal at all. We experience all of it personally, of course, but there's nothing really personal about it. Right? Now, to the authentic self, to our true self, that's a big, huge relief. But to the ego, it can be a bit like, whoa, very challenging, very shattering, because we have to start to question a lot of our convictions about who we think we are. But the good news is, you see, if the truth is that we're not distinct, separate individuals, but we're actually all part of a process that's going somewhere, then everything we experience is part of that process. And the more we let in that perspective, the more we let in this vast, profound perspective, the less personally we're going to start taking things and start taking life. Because don't most of the problems happen in human relationships when we take things personally? Isn't that true? Yeah. What's last one at the top there is for the sake of the whole. So, as I said, with ego consciousness, it's all about me. What's in it for me? What am I going to get? When you align with your true spiritual heart, with the evolutionary impulse, it's not about you. It's not about what can I get for me. It's about what can I give. It's about recognizing that I am here, we are all here, for the sake of the whole. Why? Because we are the whole. That's the truth. We actually are the whole. And so the deepest part of us naturally wants to care for the whole and take into account what's best for the whole at all times and all places. But of course the ego doesn't want to do that because we might not get what we want. So, as I said, this is the path and the goal. So if you met someone who you considered was spiritually awakened, I think they would be expressing all of those qualities. There would be that clarity of intention. They would have a sense of being completely responsible for themselves. They wouldn't be blaming you or anybody else. They would be facing everything. They wouldn't be taking everything personally. They would see themselves as part of a big process, and they'd be caring for the whole. Okay? So that's the natural expression of your authentic self, of my authentic self. But when we're in our less enlightened moments, when we're experiencing that we're embedded in ego consciousness, these are all things that we can actually practice. We can actually do to shift our allegiance and our awareness into the truth of who we really are. Now, if you get a group of individuals who are actually living this and doing this consistently, then the magic really starts to happen. Then it gets really exciting. And what starts to happen then is the emergence that you saw the movie describing earlier. And just very quickly, some of the qualities of this new cultural emergence are new intersubjective structures, right? We start to create new structures between us based on the truth of unity. Higher values, right? What becomes valued is different from what was valued before. Egoless passion, right? Because there is tremendous passion. I mean, some enlightenment teachings, they give the impression of, you know, to become free or enlightened, you just kind of become this passionless observer. You're just aware, watching everything, right? But in evolutionary enlightenment anyway, evolutionary spirituality, it liberates our passion for life and our sense of purpose for being here, free from ego, okay? Often when people express a lot of passion, there's a lot of ego in it. And then in the middle there we have evolutionary tension. Evolutionary tension means we're being pulled up. We always have that sense of reaching for what's higher, what's next, right? We're not so concerned with resting in a state of peace. We're more fascinated by what's next. Where can we go? What's next? There's a passion for perpetual development and movement. That's what enlivens us. Ecstatic intimacy. Okay, I think a lot of people are experiencing that being here at the Boom. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, right? Ecstatic intimacy. And in the middle there, autonomy and communion. So what autonomy means independence and communion. Now normally those two things, they don't go together. They sound mutually exclusive. But in this new potential, this new emergence, our own liberated independence, our full creative expression as individual human beings, and a profound experience of communion and oneness can actually become one and the same thing. And at the top there, we have natural hierarchy. So hierarchy is something that's got a bit of a bad rap since the 60s. A lot of us are very resistant to hierarchies of any kind. But what can actually start to reveal itself when we start to come together in a context beyond ego, is what we're calling natural hierarchy, which is natural. It's not imposed, it's not fixed. It's a natural emergence. And hierarchy, a natural hierarchy, is part of how the whole process of evolution develops. If we're always already the same, there's no upward movement. There's no potential for a higher motivation. So what does natural hierarchy look like? Well, it simply means that we embrace the truth of oneness and unity, right? So we're all one, we're all the same, we're all equal in that dimension. There's no difference between us. But we also embrace the fact that in the relative world of the many here, not all human beings are at the same level of consciousness development. And so, yes, we can actually learn from people who we have no doubt have gone further than us. And we can actually help guide and teach those who are looking for an example if we've got something to offer. So I think it's very important in these times that we actually start to re-embrace the notion of natural hierarchy, because then this actually opens up the possibility for a higher emergence. Okay? And then the last one is intersubjective non-duality. So that's non-duality, not just as an inner revelation, but as a living, breathing, vibrant field of unity and intimacy between us. So that would mean when I'm having a conversation, when we were having a conversation, when we were interacting together, there would be, we would know before thought that we were one. And then we would be exploring, how do we actually live? What do we want to create? What do we want to do in this world from that field of unity? It's tremendously exciting. So, can we skip to the next video, please? So this video is going to express a little more deeply, or just add a bit more context to this mystery of when autonomy and individual independence and profound communion become one and the same.
Hi. It's just been really exciting in the discussion groups to see in action what you were describing. I think yesterday when you were saying that when a group of people are in the impersonal and then the natural hierarchy starts to emerge, how much individual and collective evolution speeds up.
Right.
And it was
right.
Just to have that, just to have seen that in our own experience during the retreat has been really incredible. Also about when you're describing, I think you called it the supermind. So I was just seeing in my own experience, when on your own with the teachings, you can go so far up to your own experience.
Up to the limits of your own experience.
But the minute you're in this impersonal group, there's like a wealth of experience, and everyone who participates, it takes the whole group further.
The collective becomes a singular. The collective becomes one mind.
Right.
One mind. So then the individual's experience is actually, it's not I have access to something that is separate from me.
Yeah.
But what literally happens is a higher level of evolutionary potential is what this whole teaching is all about.
Right.
The collective literally becomes one mind. And so then the higher evolutionary juice that begins to work through it then is exponential, because you have the power of many literally becoming one in that context.
Yeah.
And so then there's a power that becomes available to all the individuals that they have access to that's not ordinarily available to them.
Yeah, it's incredible.
See? So that's when this distinction between autonomy and communion, you can't find the line anymore, right?
Yeah.
Then you can't make the distinction between the one and the many, and the lines get blurred. And at the same time, you don't feel your own autonomy is being reduced, it's actually being amplified, right? Which is the opposite thing that usually happens in group situations, like in an unenlightened collective context, is that for it to work, the autonomy of the individual has to be suppressed, right? So that the group is going to be able to function as a cooperative, right? But it's in an evolutionary context, in an enlightened evolutionary context, the autonomy of the individual doesn't have to be suppressed. As a matter of fact, what ideally has happened is that it becomes amplified. But that experience, and each individual has the experience in their own self-sense, gets stronger, larger, vaster, and deeper, right? More clear, more pronounced, more all these things. Because evolution, it's a vertical movement. So you're entering into a higher level of engagement. You see, you're living to a higher level of consciousness. It's a higher level of complexity. It's a higher level of subtlety, you see? A new potential emerges. And in this, so there's a new consciousness, there's a new perspective. So the old ways of thinking about individuality and about autonomy and about relationship and collectivity are all changed, you see, because what it means to be an individual is not the same thing anymore. It means something very different. See what I'm saying? You get the idea? Well, I'm very excited about this. This is the whole point of what I'm doing.
Okay, so I'm going to finish up in a couple of minutes. There's one more video I'd like to show. But I just want to ask the question, what is the most liberating factor in all of this? The fact that we're part of a process that's going somewhere. And that maybe we're only just getting started in terms of the journey of what's possible as human beings. I'll just speak for myself, from my own experience. What it is for me is that there's an utter positivity about the fact of being here. What it gives is a fundamental conviction that life is absolutely positive, is absolutely good. Even in the midst of all the chaos and pain and destruction and challenges that we're facing. This is why I think this perspective is so important, because it's overwhelming, isn't it? I mean, it's overwhelming how bad things can seem to be and how all these crises seem to be converging. One can start to feel kind of helpless and even despairing, you know. The more one cares and the more one lets it in. But this is why I think it's so important in our times that people start to embrace this new story, start to activate and get in touch with this connection to the evolution of the cosmos. Because it's that place that's actually going to give us the strength, the passion and the conviction to embrace this time and actually see it as necessary, you know, somehow necessary. It's all part of our evolutionary unfolding. You've probably heard of the phrase, the dark night of the soul, you know, in a lot of traditional spiritual literature. You know, before one becomes awakened or illumined, one has to go through a dark night of facing all the darkness and impurity in oneself. And the way I see it right now in our time, we're in a collective dark night of the soul. That's what's happening to the human race. We're bringing all of this crisis and chaos upon ourselves. It's a wake-up call. You know, it's a big wake-up call. And anyway, so I hope you join me in being convinced that we can actually meet the challenge and that a new world is possible. And we also need to embrace a deep time view of this. The more we get in touch with the evolutionary impulse, we're not necessarily just looking for results next year or even within our own lifetimes. We start to recognize we're part of a process that goes way beyond just our own life. Right? You know, and if reincarnation is true, and I personally have no doubt it is, maybe we would actually choose to keep coming back here, right? Because the point anymore wouldn't be just to get off the wheel that doesn't seem to be going anywhere, but actually we'd want to come back to keep the process going, right? To take it further. So I just wanted to end with that thought. So can we show the last one? Spiritual self-confidence.
What is a human being like when he or she is spiritually absolutely convinced in the overwhelmingly positive nature of existence? So what if you were convinced beyond any doubt whatsoever that to exist is good, that the will towards existence is positive? A lot of people aren't so sure, because they say, well, look, there's poverty, there's inequality, there's environmental degradation, there's fascism, and all kinds of awful things happen in the world. And nature, look what nature's doing. Nature has tsunamis and volcanoes. I mean, it's a very dangerous place to be. Life is a kind of a dicey thing. You don't know what you're going to get. If we look at all these particular problems and all these unpleasant and nasty and horrible things that can happen, do happen, will happen, have always been part of the process, we start, we're not so sure that to exist is to good, because well, living, to exist is good, but then there's pain, there's suffering, there's death. What about all that? Why is there suffering? How could God exist as long as there's pain? That kind of thing, right? So what if in the midst of all this complexity and adversity, if you knew without any doubt that the urge to exist, which relates to the Big Bang, I interpret the Big Bang as the desire to exist in time and in form. So what if you knew without any doubt that the desire to exist was overwhelmingly positive, in spite of all the terrible things that happen in the process, in the midst of it? But if you knew that the will to exist, which started with the Big Bang, in which we experience as the sexual impulse, as the creative impulse, as creative inspiration, that the will to exist, the will towards life, and the will towards creativity is overwhelmingly positive, without any, it's absolutely positive and good. Would that change your relationship to life? Because you know that life is good. Even though bad stuff happens, you still know that life is good, the will to exist is good.
Okay, so just before I finish, I just want to emphasize that evolutionary enlightenment, what I've shared with you, is part, it's one expression of a growing movement. There's a whole movement of evolutionary spirituality, philosophy, and interest in creating a new culture that is broadly going in this direction. So this is one piece that I've shared with you here, and I really encourage you, if you feel excited and intrigued by what I've shared, to really go and check it out. And I'll be happy to share with you any of the other resources after the talk. Just the one other thing I want to mention before I go into questions is our project here in Portugal, the Awaken Life Project. Can you bring up the site? There it is. So the Awaken Life Project is here in Central Portugal, founded with my dear wife and I. We came over here. I don't know how we came over here, or it's kind of a mystery. Very much that magical mystery tour I was describing to you earlier brought us here. And we wanted to endeavor to live this perspective and create this new culture in the context of communion with the natural world and in a rural setting. So we bought an abandoned quinta and we're developing this project and offering all kinds of opportunities, from meditation retreats to permaculture to courses about educating your children about the universe story. So if you want to check us out, it's awakenlifeproject.org. And if any of you would like a card, I have some here, and some other people in the audience do. Stand up. All right. And we're inspiring. This is really a collective emergence that's happening here in Portugal. There's quite a few people here today who are connected with us. So I just want to ask all the Portuguese evolutionaries to give a big yes. All right. It's happening. It is happening. This is not just theory I'm sharing with you. This is happening, and it wants to happen. And it's speeding up. It's speeding up. And it's becoming easier and easier for people to become a part of it. The more people give themselves to it, the easier it makes it for other people. That's also how evolution works. So, I just wanted to leave you with that, and I'll be happy to take any questions now for as long as they allow me. Officially, I've got about 20 minutes. Okay, so do we have someone with a microphone? Yeah. You have a mic? Yeah. So, does anybody have a question?
Okay. You're speaking as an enlightened individual. How do you feel that your enlightenment manifests in your life? And the second question I have is, how do you feel about the whole transhumanism movement? And the progression towards the singularity, and progressing from our biological foundations and
becoming one with machines, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, to answer your first question, it's everything I've been speaking about. Okay, that's as far as I've come, and what I've been sharing is obviously my own experience and my own discovery, along with. As a result of being involved with this with many other people. You have to understand it's not an individual attainment. It's not something one can discover individually. It happens between us, between people. The new enlightenment is a collective emergence. In terms of your second question about the transhumanism movement, so I'll just define that a little so that everybody knows what he was talking about. There's a lot of, techno geeks who are really turned on by this kind of perspective. Some of you might have heard of Ray Kurzweil. He's quite an incredible human being. But the way they see it is they're really looking at technology as kind of the evolution of consciousness. That it's really a technology that's going to do it for us. And, there's a lot of people say that within 20, 30 years, we will have unlimited lifespan, potentially. Those of us that are lucky enough to afford it. We'll have nanobots that'll be able to go in and clean our bloodstream and keep us going for however long. There's also people that speculate that our brains are somehow going to be melded with machines, so we won't have to go on the internet on our laptop. We just think a thought, and all the information, we just download it into our brain. Okay, it's pretty far out stuff. And there's other expressions of this, and a lot of them talk about this technological singularity point, meaning that things are changing so fast these days, and the rate of change is changing so fast, at a certain point, it's all going to sort of collapse into this singularity point, and I don't quite know what's supposed to happen then, but I guess we'll find out. So, how do I feel about that? Well, I actually do feel that our technological capacities are a big part of our evolution. I used to be very quite anti-technology myself, anti-industrial, anti-technology. But when one starts to embrace an evolutionary worldview, you start to see that everything that we develop as human beings, every step of the way, there's a potential, there's a new potential, and there's a pathology. And with every new step, there's a greater potential and opportunity, and there's a potential for misuse and destruction. And so obviously we see that with technology. So I don't think it's a negative thing. Obviously the internet, for example, is making so much possible. That's kind of, you could see that as a structure, a physical, well, not really physical even, but like the thinking layer of the planet coming alive. I don't know if any of you heard of Teilhard de Chardin. He talked about the evolution of the noosphere, the thinking layer of humanity that will become global. And I think the internet is one form, one expression of this. But the challenge is that our moral, let's say our moral and our spiritual evolution is lagging way, way behind our technological, the speed of our technological evolution and capacity. And that's where I really think the danger is. So when I hear about all these futurist transhuman prophecies and ideas, I get a little bit scared, to be honest. It's like, well, you know, like, well, okay, could be great to live forever, but as an egomaniac, maybe that's not such a good idea. You know, if we actually evolve our consciousness and then find ways to actually live for 100, 500 years so we can actually create the future, then great. But if we embrace these technologies and there isn't an equal evolution of our consciousness, I think there's obvious dangers. Does that answer your question? Oh, you've lost the mic now. Anyone else have a question?
Hello, boomers. Technology. When you talk about evolution and the technology, evolution suggests that it's what do you say, organize itself to become more efficient and doing what environmental input they get from the environment. So with technology, in a step of evolution, you how can you say that it's it's dangerous, but what about evolution? You will come into I mean, everything cannot exist at the same place at the same time. Of course not, everything dies, but what do you mean when you say it's scary?
What do I mean?
Yeah, it's like...
Well, first of all, I wasn't saying there's anything negative about technology. I wasn't saying that. I was just making the point that, this is in my humble opinion, our technological evolution, our technological capacity is developing at a much faster rate than our moral and spiritual capacity or development. So there's nothing dangerous with technology in and of itself. Technology is just technology.
But
But
if,
how are we going to use it? You see, how do we use it?
But if the consciousness is like, as you say, exploding now exponentially, and what is it that say that we will not meet up with the technological
well, I think we
use?
can. I think we can. I think we can, and we have to, and we will.
Okay, good.
Definitely. Oh. Sorry, next. We'll go to you next. Yeah. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
So I have to say one of my worst fears, and I hope it's going to be okay, but I feel like I'm just really scared that there's going to be a time in which nobody is going to listen. Nobody's going to listen anymore. And I'm just wondering what we can do to make sure they do. And I know that, I don't know.
You mean listen to stuff like this?
Yeah, because like we're all like-minded people here. Like, I mean, you're almost preaching to the choir. Not in a bad way, of course. This is good to hear. But, you know, like my parents, like they don't even know I'm here. If they did, I'm going to tell them in about an hour or two. But if they were here, like their mind would be, they just couldn't take it in. Like they watch Fox News every night and take it seriously. I'm from the United States.
Yeah, I get you. I know Fox News, so I know what you're talking about.
Yes, sadly everybody knows it. But yeah, like how do we, if it's possible at all, how do we reach other people, you know?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and it's a question that nearly always comes up in one form or another. What about everybody else? What about all the, quote, ignorant or more unconscious people who are just not interested in this, right? Of which there are many at this point. Right? Well, I agree with what Charles Eisenstein, what I heard him saying before when someone asked a similar question. You cannot force anybody to change their views. You cannot impose it on anybody. If you try and do that, there's going to be a reaction. You're actually going to enforce their ego. So I believe the only way we can do it is to actually be the change. If we hear this, if we resonate with it, if we know it's true, then as I said, and if we know deeply that we are only one, there is only one, and you, my friend, are that one, right? Just as much as I am, then it's up to you, and it's up to me. It's up to you, and it's up to me to take it as far as we can take it in our life. And then we find out what the results will be. Right? Now, what I've seen in my own life and the people we're associated with is when you get 1 person, 2 person, 5 person, 10 persons, 50 persons, people, starting to wake up and starting to experience this context of trust, unity, intimacy, creative passion, right? Together, other people who are somewhat open and receptive start noticing, like, wow, what happened to you? You're so happy. You're so, there's so much dignity that you're expressing. There's so much trust. There's so much direction. What happened to you? What's happened to them? What are they doing? They seem to be lit up from within, right? So that's how we actually get other people interested. The people that are going to be interested will be interested when they see it demonstrated. And you see, this is why this is such a tipping point time now, because a lot of us are yearning for this. A lot of us sense something big is possible, but there are not enough examples, especially on bigger than on a cultural scale, you see. And so people are cynical, or it's like, oh, sounds good, but But just imagine if more and more of us start actually manifesting these potentials, individually and together in whatever context we find ourselves. More and more people are going to take notice and be inspired. And, of course, there's always going to be the people that don't want to know and are going to resist it. That's just the way it is. But that's how we do it. That's how we do it. We don't do it by trying to convert anyone. Does that make sense? Does everyone say a big yes to that? Yeah. Be the change you want to see in the world, as Mahatma Gandhi said. Then you see then you don't actually worry anymore about your parents and all the other, quote, straight people or, the conservatives. I mean, they worry you on the level of what they can potentially do in the world, but you don't really worry about them or trying to convert them, or it's not a problem anymore. It's just like, no, I know who I am, and I know what I'm here for. And if you say yes to that completely, that's its own fulfillment. You don't have to wait for anybody else to get on board with you. Make sense? Okay. This gentleman had yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to remember we are talking about transhumanism.
Yeah.
It's humanity always had a word for a direction issue to its development. Illuminism or modernism were the same. Transhumanism now is one of the words, and you have other beautiful or other words too, like techno-Gaianism or techno-shamanism, and all of this is it's a great scale portal of informations that you can get it. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, don't you think these issues of narcissism things is just a very simple question of dimension and that we already invented the words for this scale? It would be like our conscience travels around anthropocentric, biocentric, and ecocentric, and we have no conscience that we are always traveling around this 3-dimension, and most of the time we are I'll just say seduced to the anthropocentric dimension because of our scale, of our conditioning, of our condition of reflection in one another,
Yeah, I'm not sure if I totally understood everything you said, but I agree.
I was asking you if you don't think this would be a simple issue, a more simple issue, because when you talk about narcissism, you always come with narcissism and mythology, and there's a lot in that story. That would be the first reference of developing knowledge in our culture, in our European culture. So for you, narcissism could be a very bad thing. For me, it can be a very good thing.
Well, I think it's both, actually, I'll explain what I mean. Because in our
and what I was saying is for not using this kind of words, couldn't be a talk about this 3-scale dimension that would be anthropocentric, biocentric, and ecocentric, but because most of the people doesn't know what this means, and it was very good if we all know what is anthropocentric being and a biocentric state and ecocentric state, for us to open a little bit our mind to all the systems that we have around us, like permaculture system, that it's a very intelligent form of conscience,
If there's one thing for sure, is we definitely have to open our mind to all possibilities in all dimensions. So I totally agree with you, but I just want to say a little bit more about the narcissism. Because, the myth of Narcissus, where that word comes from, is when Narcissus was looking in the water, right? And he becomes fascinated by his own reflection. So why I said in one sense it's positive, there's a positive way we could look at that in terms of our evolution, is that's when self-consciousness developed. That's what it symbolizes, is when we became able to reflect on ourselves and who we are.
Sorry to interrupt you, but you have the Greeks and the problem of alterity, that they were the first ones to develop the idea. Narcissism is an illustration, is a theater, and it has a lot of complexities in that kind
Definitely.
of story. Okay,
Definitely.
So alternative in philosophy, alteridade. I don't know how to say it in English. Alteridade in Portuguese. That means the notion of the other is something that was the main issue to the development of culture of the state and of the republic. You know that it's the model that you use it to make the Roman Empire, for example.
Yeah. So that development of self-consciousness, you know, it's all part of what makes us human. It's all part of our capacity, all the capacity, the sophisticated capacity now to think and reflect and feel, right? That's all a positive product of self-consciousness, you know, and evolution. But where it's become a block, if you like, or you know, my feeling is that the process of individuation, right, the freedom of the individual, has reached its apex now. Yeah, with there's been a lot of hard-won freedoms, and we, like I was saying before, we have all kinds of freedoms we never had before. But if you look at the countries, for example, that have the most freedoms in the world, like Scandinavia or Holland, Northern Europe, that's also where you have the most depression. Right? I'm making big generalizations here, but a lot of us in the postmodern world who have all these freedoms, right, what we've lost is a sense of higher purpose and higher meaning. Because what's the highest meaning, the highest purpose in the postmodern, you know, age of the individual, is what's good for me and fulfilling my desires and running away from my fears and gathering as many cool, radical experiences as I can for myself. You know, we're all consumers. That's consumerism on the level of our psychology. You know, I'm here to get and have for me, right? And that's what I mean by the negative side of this emergence of individuation and individuality. There's a positive and a negative, as there is with every evolutionary emergence. So I think the challenge for us now is, well, how do we go beyond this endless infatuation with me and my freedom to do what I want to do when I want to do it? You know, because, you know, that's cool. You know, I did that for many years, but after a while it was like, well, you know, I could do this for the rest of my life, but I didn't feel I was going to go any deeper. You know, I was actually looking for purpose, for direction, for meaning, for, dare I say, a higher moral context for being a human being. And of course, we've rejected, you know, traditional religion and belief and ideology, right? We can't come together in that anymore because we know all the dangers of that, right? But this evolutionary context and understanding and perspectives, it releases the potential for us to come together in a higher moral context for human life that transcends the fears and desires of the separate ego. But this is coming from within. It's not being imposed from without. This actually wants to come from within. And this has the power to bring us together in something that's, dare I say, higher, that's sacred. Because it's one thing to experience that, you know, in the highs of spiritual experience, or maybe some of you experience it on the dance floor, or whatever you do, you know, to experience that depth in yourself, right? But how do we actually live it? How do we actually bring it into our life, into our relationships? This is how we can do it. And this is what I mean when the values change. What changes? The value changes from what's good for me, what's in it for me, to what's good for the whole. Where does my individual creative purpose fit into the matrix of the whole? And that's actually what gives us the most joy and happiness when we really do it. Because we're most happy when we're giving. Has anybody noticed? When we're giving without wanting to receive anything back. That's when we're most happy. We're just an outpouring of, you know, I haven't used the word love, right? Because that's a word that's been cheapened, and, you know, what does it really mean? Again, I think it's one of these words that we throw around, you know, but it's love. And that's the deepest happiness. Did you have a question? Okay, she just needs to finish her mouthful first. Yeah, go ahead. So, I've gone past the official stop time, so I'm hoping that someone's just going to stop me.
I'm hoping someone's not going to stop you.
Well.
Okay, I've just loved this talk so much. Thank you. You've inspired me to check out Andrew Cohen's website, yourselves.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Basically, this is also a contribution. This comes from my passion of sharing, and I love this version of passion as a cool thing from the spiritual
Passion is cool.
Yeah! Long live passion!
Actually, I just want to say the original meaning of the word passion, because we all heard about the passion of Christ, right? You know, the crucifixion of Christ is often called the passion, you know, and you're like, what does that mean? But the original meaning of the word is when something comes through us that transcends ourselves. That's what passion really means. It's not just romance, you know, and sexual bliss. True passion is spiritual.
Okay, so here comes my comment question. I've been following people who work with transpersonal psychology, Ken Wilber, all these sorts of people who are saying relatively similar things that are so inspiring and so coherent, so holistic, so intelligent, so liberating. And, well, I'm not going to tell you what my job is, okay, but I am going to say that I work with something which is very much about the title of your talk. Answering the call from the cosmos. I'm still not telling you what it is.
Okay.
It's absolutely all about intersubjectivity. It's very much about the being, the separate self, or my name's Stephen, so Stephen in life, but it's also about life in Stephen and life in everybody. And it's very much about cycles, and it's very much about the evolutionary perspective.
Right.
And you folks who are so fucking interesting, and you know so much about all these things, and you're putting all these amazing things together, you guys still aren't working with this thing. Do you know what I'm talking about?
We're not working with it.
Yeah, I'm talking about astrology.
Oh, astrology, okay.
When are you guys going to please put astrology in the framework, you know? I mean, I'm here to help, and it's going to be my passion to share and my joy to share what I know about astrology and how it fits all this, because everything you've been saying can be so sort of expanded and made really specific, like individualized for each person. And it's just so cool. I'd like everyone to know that. I'd like everyone to, when you get home, just use general websites of astrology so you can know your own chart, because that's you in life and that's life in you. That's what this great guy was just talking about.
So
it's a map of existence.
Yeah, very interesting. Can I just respond?
I just wanted to say thank you and please respond.
Yeah. So, but what I want to say to you is, well, that's obviously what you're here for. Right? Because there's only so much that any one human being can embrace, you know? I mean, so, you know, obviously my calling is to be up here giving talks like this, you know? But, you know, we can't all do that, and we can't all be astrologers, and we can't all be permaculture wizards. You know, we've all got a gift. We've all got a unique gift. We're all here to give something. You know, the universe has embedded us with some kind of gift that wants to unfold. And that's going to be different. It's going to be different for all of us. It's going to take a different form and a different expression. But you see, when we're doing it from this deeper place, it's free from ego. It's free from specialness. It's like free from, hey, look at me up here giving the talk, or me, look at, I'm such a cool astrologer. It's all being given, as I was saying before. So if you want to know what the evolutionary impulse wants of you, really contemplate and get in touch with what are your deepest passions. What is it that turns you on? What is it that you feel you are here to share and to give, right? And start giving that, start putting that on the front burner if it's not on the front burner already. You know, stop pushing it to the back because, you know, I've got my job and my wife and my family and I don't have the time, or whatever excuses your ego will come up with, and it will. And you start putting it on the front burner. In this evolutionary context, and I can guarantee you'll be away. You'll know who you are and why you're here. So that sounds interesting to me. I don't know much about it personally, but I'm sure there's one book I have heard of that does go into that I haven't actually read. One thing I would say though about astrology is that we do have to be careful Because there are ways, there are different, spiritual tools that can give us direction and patterns and help us know ourselves and recognize ourselves. But we always have to be looking at that within a context of not knowing, and anything's possible. Because as soon as we fix ourselves in any way, well, like I'm an Aquarius, so I'm like that, and that, or, you know, I'm whatever. I'm not saying you're doing this, you're not, obviously. But as soon as we fix ourselves in any way, that evolutionary passion can be inhibited. So I'm sure astrology has a lot to offer because, you know, it's all about the universe, the macro reflecting the micro and all of that. So I'd be interested to find out more about it. So they haven't kicked me off yet, so does anyone else have a question? Any more? Okay, I think I've got to finish. So thank you all very much for your... did we have one more? Have we got time for one more? No. Okay, we've got to finish. So thank you very much for all your attention and energy, and really enjoyed it. And let's make it happen. Yes.